So, were you successful? Let's solve this together. In task number 1, we should show an alert with any text of our choice when this button is pressed. Now, first of all, we of course need to take control over this section so that we then, in a second step, can add an event listener as we learned it to this button. So therefore, we're going to do something we did many times before already. We're going to create a Vue app. So for that, here in app.js, we simply call Vue create app. We can store that in an extra variable or a constant. We pass our config object to the app. And of course, we want to mount the app and connect it to the HTML code. And here I'll connect it to this section, which already has an ID of assignment. So we can select this with hashtag assignment using a CSS ID selector. Now here on this button, we can use vOn to bind this to an event. And I want to bind this to the click event with vOn:click, and then define the code that should run. And here, as you learned, it's best to add a method. So here we add the methods key to our object config. And this then takes an object full of methods. And now in here, you can add any methods of your choice, or methods with any name of your choice, I should say. And I'll just name it show alert. Sounds like a logical name to me. And in here, I'll then show an alert with the built-in alert JavaScript function. So this is not coming from Vue. That's a built-in function available in vanilla JavaScript and hence also available here in Vue. And I'll just say this works, but of course you can use any text. And now we want to execute show alert when this button is clicked. So here we can point at show alert like this, or alternatively also execute it explicitly, which in this case doesn't really make a difference. But then if it doesn't make a difference, I personally prefer to just point at it since this is closer to vanilla JavaScript. And if we now save that and reload, I can click show alert and I see this works alert. So that's task number 1 solved. Task number 2 is to register the user input on key down events on this input here and output in the paragraph here what the user entered. And event target value, like before, can help us with that. There's just one special thing about the key down event, which you'll see in a second. Again, we can use vOn, and now we want to listen to the key down event, which is another default browser event we can listen to. So a user event the browser is aware of, I should say. And now again, we could execute the code inline here, or better, point at a method that should be executed. And that's what I'll do. I'll add a new method here, name it save input. But again, this method name is up to you. And in here, I want to save whatever the user entered in a value, in a property, in a variable, which I can output in this paragraph. So for that, we need data. Methods allows us to define methods we want to execute, either on our own or implicitly through events. Data allows us to define the data we want to work with in this Vue instance. So here we should return an object, and in here we can then add, let's say, user input or whatever you want as a key, and initially store an empty string in here. And then here in save input, I'll set this user input equal to whatever the user entered, and for that again, since this is a keyboard event on an input element, we can leverage event target by accepting the default event object the browser gives us. Event target then gives us access to the HTML element on which the event occurred, in this case the input, and then this input element has a value property which we can use to read the current value. And with that, we set the user input data property with this user input equal to whatever the user entered. Now we just need to point at save input here. And if we now save that and reload, I can enter max here. and see nothing because we probably should also output the input here. So here in this paragraph, we use interpolation to output user input. So to output this property and its value. And now if I reload, I can see what I enter. However, you'll notice one thing. There is a delay of 1 keystroke. And the reason for that is that the key down event is fired when the key is pressed, but not yet released. The value in the input here only updates once the key is released, or to be precise, once the key down event is finished. That's why we have 1 keystroke delay here. That's the only reason. But that's not a bug, that's just a key down event, and that's task number 2 solved. Task number 3 was to repeat 2, but only output the entered value if the enter key was pressed inside of this second input. So since we want to repeat what we did before, of course we can copy this first event listener for the key down event and add it on the second input as well. Here I will use the same method. We could also add a new method so that we also, update a different data property, a second one, which we could add on the second input. But here I'll reuse both the user input and the method. But I now want to make sure that the value we output here is only output if the enter key was pressed. And that's actually something I showed you before as well. We can have our confirmed input, which is also an empty string initially. And we can add a new method, for example, confirm input, where I want to set this confirmed input equal to this user input. And then here in this paragraph, with the double curly braces, I output confirmed input. So this new data property, which we're setting here, which I added a few seconds ago. Now confirmed input is output here, and we want to make sure that confirm input, this method, executes when the enter key is pressed in this input field here, in this input element. For that, we can again listen to an event with vOn. In this case, let's say the key up event, and then use an event modifier with the dot, for example here, the enter key modifier, to make sure that only if the enter key is pressed and released, whatever function we tie to this listener here is executed. So now I point at confirm input here, so at this method. And now this method is only executed if we press a key, but not any key, but the enter key. Now I'm going to restructure this to make it a bit easier to read with my shortcut here in the IDE, but that's the same code I just wrote, just formatted differently to be a bit easier to read. And if we now save that and reload, I can enter max here, and we see it updates in the first paragraph, of course, because there we're outputting user input, not confirmed input. But in the second paragraph, where we do output confirmed input, we see nothing. Only if I hit enter here, only then we output max in the second paragraph as well. And that's the assignment solved. That is all you need to know about events for the moment. With that, let's move on and let's dig deeper into Vue.